The CEO mocked the waitress in Mandarin until she answered flawlessly and rewrote the deal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. At a high-end restaurant in downtown Manhattan, the room buzzed with the hum of voices, fine dining, and the clinking of glass. Among the rich and powerful, one table stood out. It was a scene that many would remember for years to come, but none would be able to predict the way it would unfold. The CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world, Michael Blake, sat at a corner table, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. His silver watch gleamed under the dim lights, and his sharp gaze scanned the restaurant, seemingly unimpressed with everything in sight. He was the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted, quickly, efficiently, and with no patience for anything less. As he scrolled through his phone, the waitress who approached his table caught his attention. She was different from the other staff. While the others had practiced smiles and quick service, she stood quietly, holding her notepad in one hand, with a calm demeanor that suggested she was not easily intimidated by the high-profile guests she served. Her name was Emily, and though she had worked at the restaurant for months, tonight would be the night her life changed forever. Michael, noticing her approach, decided to test her. Smirking, he glanced up and said in Mandarin, a language he assumed she wouldn't understand, "The food here is mediocre, but I suppose it will do. How do you expect to earn your tip, HM?" He chuckled softly, clearly thinking he had made a clever remark. The other diners at nearby tables didn't seem to notice, too absorbed in their own conversations. Emily stood still for a moment, her expression unreadable. Her mind raced. This was not the first time she had encountered people who underestimated her, who assumed she was nothing more than a quiet server. But tonight, something was different. Instead of backing down, she stepped forward, leaning slightly on the edge of his table. Her voice was steady, and without hesitation, she responded in perfect Mandarin. "Actually, sir, the food here is far superior to most places in the city. The chef has a unique blend of techniques that create dishes with flavors you won't find anywhere else. Perhaps you've missed the subtle complexity in the seasoning." Michael froze. His mind was racing. He had expected a flustered response, maybe even confusion. But here she was, responding in perfect Mandarin, not only understanding him, but schooling him on the very thing he had mocked. For a moment, he stared at her, speechless. He had heard rumors about her being more than just a waitress, but he hadn't taken them seriously. Now, here she was, calmly correcting him in his own language, and he could hardly process it. Emily didn't wait for a response. She simply smiled, her professionalism never faltering. "Is there anything else you would like to know about the menu, sir?" she asked, placing the menu in front of him. Michael blinked, trying to regain his composure. His mind was still reeling. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice no longer laced with mockery, but with genuine curiosity. Emily paused for a brief second, then replied, "Just a waitress with a passion for languages, sir." With that, she turned to leave, her footsteps light and sure as she moved away. But Michael wasn't done. The more he thought about her, the more intrigued he became. This was not the ordinary server he had dismissed with his usual arrogance. There was something more here, something he couldn't quite place. As Emily walked away, he decided to take a different approach. He would get to know her, find out who she really was, and perhaps offer her something more than just a tip. But he had no idea how much that decision would change everything. Michael sat there, stunned, his mind racing. Emily had responded in perfect Mandarin, completely dismantling his expectations. For a moment, he couldn't focus on anything but the way she had confidently taken charge of the situation. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't hesitated. She had simply corrected him, and it had been flawless. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he had made a serious mistake by underestimating her. He had thought of her as nothing more than a waitress, a part of the scenery in his world of million-dollar deals and high-stakes business. But here she was, revealing a depth he hadn't anticipated. For a brief second, he considered following her to the kitchen, demanding answers about who she really was. But that thought vanished just as quickly as it appeared. He knew he wouldn't get anywhere by forcing her to open up. No, he needed a different approach. He needed to let her come to him. As Emily moved through the restaurant, attending to other customers, Michael couldn't help but watch her. He noticed how she interacted with each table. Polite, professional, but there was something more. She wasn't just serving food. She was engaging with people. She knew their names, she remembered their preferences, and most importantly, she treated them with a respect that most people, especially those in her position, didn't seem to offer. It was something he rarely saw. Most of the staff at places like this were just here to do their jobs, to make money and go home. But Emily, there was something about her that suggested she had more to offer than anyone gave her credit for. Michael decided he couldn't let this opportunity slip by. He had to know more. He wasn't used to feeling this way. Curious, intrigued, drawn to someone who wasn't part of his usual world. He had made a lot of enemies on his way to the top, but he never thought about people in terms of what they could teach him. But Emily was different. There was something about the way she had handled the Mandarin challenge. She didn't make a big deal out of it, but he could tell it wasn't the first time she had been underestimated. She had responded as if it was second nature, as though she had faced moments like this many times before. After finishing his meal, Michael called the waiter over and asked for the check, but he wasn't ready to leave just yet. As the waiter left, Michael's mind was spinning. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his assistant. Find out everything you can about Emily, the waitress at La Belle Époque. I need to know who she is. He hit send, then placed the phone back in his pocket. Emily was on her way over with the check. As she placed the check down in front of him, she didn't say a word. But Michael could tell she knew something had changed. Her posture was a little straighter, her movements a little more purposeful. She wasn't just another waitress anymore. She was someone who had caught his attention in a way no one had in a long time. Is everything to your liking, sir? She asked, her tone polite but firm. Michael looked up at her and smiled, the tension from earlier having faded slightly. Actually, yes, he said. Everything was perfect. Thank you. She nodded, acknowledging his compliment. But there was no fawning, no attempt to make small talk. She was professional, efficient, and that only made him more intrigued. As she turned to leave, Michael stopped her with a question. Emily, he said, his voice slightly softer than before. She turned back, her eyes meeting his. Yes, she replied, her tone neutral. How did you learn to speak Mandarin? He asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. It's a long story, she said, her gaze shifting slightly, as if she was weighing how much to share. But I've had some experiences in life that required me to learn quickly. Michael couldn't help but be fascinated by her answer. There was something about the way she said it, something in her eyes, that made him believe there was a lot more to her than she let on. He decided then and there that he needed to know more. Emily gave a small nod and started to walk away, but Michael wasn't done yet. He couldn't leave it at just this. He needed to get her attention, to find out what lay beneath that calm, collected exterior. He stood up, his mind made up. Emily, wait, he called after her. She turned back, a hint of curiosity now in her expression. I have an idea. Why don't you join me for a drink? He asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of something new, something genuine. Emily looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she simply shook her head. I'm sorry, sir, she said, but I'm working. She turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing there, feeling something he rarely did, rejected. It was strange. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not by someone like her. But for some reason, it only made him more determined to understand who she really was. As the night continued, Michael found himself thinking about Emily more and more. Who was she really? And why did he feel like she was hiding something? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about a waitress who could speak Mandarin. There was something deeper here, something that went beyond languages and skills. He had to know. The next day, Michael found himself unable to stop thinking about Emily. It was rare for him to be distracted by anyone, let alone a waitress. But there was something about her. The way she responded to him in Mandarin, so calmly and confidently, despite his mockery, had struck a chord deep within him. He couldn't quite place it, but he needed to see her again. He had to know more about her. He was used to controlling situations, to calling the shots, but Emily had managed to flip the script in a way he hadn't expected. His curiosity was eating at him, and he wasn't the type to let that go easily. That afternoon, he found himself in the restaurant again, sitting at the same table, waiting for Emily. It wasn't busy yet. The evening rush had not yet begun, and the restaurant was calm. He sat back in his chair, staring out the window, his mind racing through every interaction he had with her. She was different. She didn't fawn over him like the others, and she certainly didn't treat him like some kind of VIP, even though he was. When Emily finally appeared, her eyes immediately met his, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. She had that same calm demeanor that had both intrigued and baffled him the night before. "Good evening, Mr. Blake," she said, her tone still professional, but with a hint of something softer underneath. "Good evening, Emily," he replied, his voice steady. "How are you today?" She nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I'm doing well. How may I assist you?" Michael looked at her, sizing her up. He wanted to ask her a million questions, to understand what made her tick, but instead, he kept his voice low and casual. "I was wondering if we could have a private conversation." Emily raised an eyebrow, a little surprised. She had been expecting him to be the same arrogant man from the previous night, but there was something different about him now. "About what?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "About you," he said simply, his gaze never leaving hers. There was a brief pause before she nodded and gestured toward a quieter corner of the restaurant. "All right, follow me," she said. They walked to a secluded area where they could talk without being interrupted. Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement as he sat down across from her. This was uncharted territory for him. He had never pursued someone who didn't seem interested in his wealth or status. Emily sat down, her posture straight and poised. She gave him a look that suggested she was ready for whatever came next, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him. "What do you want to know, Mr. Blake?" she asked, her voice calm. Michael leaned in, his eyes focused on her. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he said, not bothering to hide the truth. "Your knowledge of Mandarin, for example. You clearly know more than just a little about language." Emily's expression remained unchanged, but she could sense the weight behind his words. "I studied languages for a long time," she said, her voice soft. "But I left that world to pursue something more practical." "Practical?" Michael repeated, intrigued. "You're a waitress in one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. That doesn't seem all that practical." Emily's eyes darkened slightly as she looked away for a moment. "It's practical for me. I needed to find a way to support myself, and this job was the best option at the time." She looked back at him, her gaze steady. "What's your point, Mr. Blake?" Michael felt a shift in the conversation. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone like her. But there was something about her resolve, her calmness in the face of his questions, that made him want to dig deeper. "I think you're hiding something," he said, his voice quieter now. "I think you're more than just a waitress. I want to know who you really are." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She simply sat there, looking at him as though she was weighing her next words carefully. After a long moment of silence, she spoke. "You're right," she said. "I'm hiding something, but it's not something I'm ready to share with someone like you." Michael's curiosity piqued further. "Someone like me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who thinks they can buy everything," Emily replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not interested in your money, Mr. Blake. I'm interested in people who see me for who I am, not what I can do for them." Michael was taken aback. He had never heard someone speak to him like this, especially not someone in her position. He had built his empire on understanding people, on knowing how to manipulate them for his own gain. But Emily wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, and that alone made her fascinating to him. "I see," he said slowly. "So, you're telling me that all this time, I've been wrong about you?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, you've been wrong about me," she said finally. "But that's not the important part." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The important part is that I don't need your approval to be who I am." Michael's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he just stared at her. He was used to having control, to making people bend to his will. But with Emily, he couldn't do that. And in some strange way, it both frustrated and excited him. "I respect that," he said, his voice softer than before. "But I still want to know more about you. About who you really are." Emily looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, without a word, she stood up and walked away, leaving Michael sitting at the table, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: uncertainty. The next few days felt like a blur to Michael. Emily's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something crucial he was missing, something that had been hidden in plain sight. He had always been in control of his company, of his life, of the people around him. But Emily, the waitress he had initially underestimated, had turned that control upside down. She had walked away from him without a second thought, leaving him to question everything he thought he knew about himself. Every time he tried to push the thought of her aside, it crept back, stronger than before. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and that intrigued him more than anything. He had been to the restaurant again the following evening, but she wasn't there. He had tried to convince himself that it was just a fleeting curiosity, that he was overthinking things. But he knew deep down that wasn't true. The next day, he decided to act. He had a meeting scheduled for late afternoon, but he cleared his schedule. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to find out more about Emily. As the sun began to set, he entered La Belle Époque once again, determined to speak to her. He hadn't planned what to say, but he knew it was time to confront the questions that had been gnawing at him for days. The restaurant was bustling, the hum of conversation filling the air as servers hurried from one table to the next. He scanned the room, looking for Emily. When he spotted her, his heart skipped a beat. She was at the far end of the restaurant, moving between tables with the same calm efficiency he had observed before. She didn't seem to notice him at first, and Michael took the opportunity to watch her, observing how naturally she navigated the space. She wasn't just a waitress, she was in control of her domain, in a way that he, as CEO, rarely experienced. Emily was focused, composed, and entirely unbothered by the presence of someone like him. For a moment, he stood there, hesitant. Then, gathering his courage, he made his way over to her. She turned as he approached, and their eyes met. For a brief second, Michael thought he saw a flicker of recognition, but her face remained neutral. "Good evening, Emily," he said, his voice a little more unsure than he intended. "Mr. Blake," she responded, her tone polite, but distant. He noticed that she didn't flinch when she saw him, and that made him feel even more uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice a little more insistent this time. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was weighing the situation. After a moment, she nodded and led him to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the bustle of the dining area. Once they were seated, she folded her arms and looked at him expectantly. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, choosing his words carefully, "about how I think everything has a price." Emily didn't say anything, but her gaze remained steady, giving him space to continue. "I realize I don't know anything about you, and maybe that's been part of my mistake. I've spent my entire life calculating everything. But with you, I feel like I've been missing the point." He looked into her eyes, searching for a reaction. Emily's expression softened, just slightly. "I'm not here to change your life, Mr. Blake," she said quietly. "I'm just doing my job." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't interested in changing him or fixing him. She wasn't even interested in him in the way he thought she might be. She was simply living her life, unaffected by his wealth or status. And that realization made him feel something unfamiliar, vulnerability. "I don't want to just be another customer to you," he said, leaning forward. "I want to understand who you really are, Emily. Not the waitress, not the person I saw last night, but the person underneath all that." Emily was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his face as though trying to decide whether or not to trust him. Finally, she spoke. "You really want to know who I am?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Michael nodded, unable to hide the sincerity in his expression. "Yes," he said simply. She studied him for a moment longer before finally breaking the silence. "I'm not who you think I am," she said softly. "I've had a lot of different lives before this one, but I've learned the hard way that it's better to keep some things hidden." Michael felt a sharp pang of guilt, realizing how much he had misjudged her. "I'm sorry for the way I've treated you," he said, the words coming out more easily than he expected. "I never meant to make you feel small or invisible, but I see now that I've been wrong about you." Emily's eyes softened, and she gave him a small nod. "I know you didn't mean to, but it's not the first time I've been underestimated. It happens more than you think." Michael's mind raced. There was so much he still didn't know about her. So much more than the confident waitress he had seen the other night. He wanted to know everything. I don't want to just be the guy who offers you a job or makes you a charity case, he said. I want to understand the real you. And maybe, in the process, I'll learn a little bit more about myself too. Emily looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, just a little. You're getting closer, she said softly. But it's going to take more than just a conversation to figure me out. Michael was taken aback by her words. He had expected her to shut him down or walk away, but instead, she had given him a small piece of hope. He wasn't sure where this would go or what he was supposed to do next, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was on the right path. I'm willing to take that challenge, he said quietly. Emily's smile grew just a little, but she didn't say anything else. As they sat there, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background, and for the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he wasn't in control of the situation. But that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop controlling everything and start truly listening. The following days at La Belle Époque felt different for Michael. He couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Emily, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly knew about people outside of his usual circles. Emily had opened his eyes to a new way of seeing things, and for the first time in a long time, he felt uncomfortable in his own skin. The world he had built, filled with power, wealth, and control, suddenly seemed distant and less fulfilling. He had been chasing something for so long, but now he was questioning whether it was the right thing to pursue. He went to the restaurant again that week, but Emily wasn't working. It frustrated him more than he expected. He wanted to understand her, to get to know her better, but he didn't know how to approach it. He couldn't keep coming to the restaurant as if everything was normal. It felt too transactional, like he was treating her like an object of curiosity instead of a person. He had to find another way. After his meeting that afternoon, Michael decided to take a different approach. He didn't want to wait for Emily to come to him anymore. He was going to take a chance and go to her. He went straight to the small apartment he had learned about from his assistant. He had requested her address days earlier, and though it wasn't something he typically did, the idea of not knowing more about her felt unbearable. When he arrived at the building, he stood in front of the door for a long moment, hesitating. He had no idea why he was doing this. He had never gone out of his way for someone like this before. But Emily wasn't like anyone he had ever met. Finally, he knocked on the door. A few seconds passed before Emily opened it, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him standing there. "Mr. Blake," she said, her tone guarded but polite. "What are you doing here?" Michael took a deep breath. He had no plan, no script, just the truth. "I wanted to talk to you," he said simply. "I know this might seem strange, but I need to understand you. Who you are." Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "I don't have time for this," she said softly. "I've already told you more than I should have." Michael didn't move. He stood there for a moment, taking in her words. But he wasn't going to back down this time. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," he said. "I just want to know more about you." Emily was quiet for a long time, as if she was deciding whether to let him in, both literally and figuratively. Finally, she nodded, stepping aside and allowing him to enter. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, plants, and photographs that seemed to tell a story of a life well lived. As he walked in, Michael was struck by the contrast between this humble space and the cold, sterile world he inhabited. "Take a seat," she said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll make some coffee." Michael sat down, trying to process everything. He had never been in a place like this, and he couldn't deny that it made him feel out of place. But he wasn't going to leave. He needed answers. "I don't know what you want from me, Mr. Blake," Emily said as she placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. "I've already told you that I'm not interested in your world." Michael looked at her, his gaze softening. "I'm not here to change your life," he said. "I'm just trying to understand who you are." Emily sat down across from him, her posture still guarded. She didn't seem angry or annoyed, but there was a palpable tension in the room. "What is it that you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady. Michael leaned forward, his voice more sincere than he had intended. "I just want to get to know you better, Emily. You've already shown me more than anyone else has in years, and I realize that maybe I've been missing the point." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a sip of her coffee, her eyes fixed on him. Finally, she spoke. "You've been chasing something your whole life, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "And now you're not sure if it's worth it." Michael felt a pang of vulnerability. It was as if she could see right through him. Yeah, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent so much time focusing on business and success that I forgot what really matters. Emily's expression softened. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. I'm not asking you to fix me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just want to know what it's like to not be consumed by everything I've built. Emily set her coffee cup down, leaning back on the couch. I think you're starting to understand, she said. But it's going to take time. You can't rush something like this. Michael nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He had come to this apartment looking for answers, but instead, he was finding something even more valuable, clarity. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Emily didn't have all the answers, but she was showing him a different way to live, one where success didn't have to be measured in money or power, and maybe that was enough for now. The following weeks unfolded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as Michael continued his visits to the restaurant. The casual meetings with Emily, first just moments in passing, turned into longer conversations, where they would sit down and share coffee during her breaks. Each time, he felt a little more drawn to her, a little more connected to a side of life he had long neglected. Emily had a way of seeing the world that was entirely different from his. She didn't view success through the lens of money or status. To her, the world was about real connections, genuine experiences, and small moments that could change a person's life. Michael had always considered himself successful, but these conversations with Emily made him question the true meaning of success. He had built his empire, but at what cost? Over time, he began to see the cracks in his own life, the ones he had ignored for years. One evening, Michael arrived at the restaurant just as Emily was finishing her shift. He had intended to ask her for dinner, but as he waited for her, he saw something that made him hesitate. Emily was speaking with a young woman, someone he hadn't seen before. The way she interacted with her was kind and warm, and the young woman smiled brightly, clearly grateful for Emily's attention. Michael watched them for a moment, feeling something stir inside him. He hadn't realized how much Emily had given to others, how much she gave of herself without expecting anything in return. That's when he understood. It wasn't just about her independence, her strength, or her intellect that had captivated him. It was her generosity, the way she made people feel seen and valued, even in the smallest of ways. It was something he had lost touch with in his own life. As Emily turned to leave, Michael stood up from his table and walked toward her, his heart racing in a way he hadn't expected. Emily, can I talk to you for a moment? He asked, his voice slightly shaky. She looked up, a small smile forming on her lips. Of course, Mr. Blake. Is something wrong? Michael shook his head. No, nothing's wrong. I've just been thinking about everything. About what I've been chasing and what I've missed. Emily raised an eyebrow, her expression curious, but open. What do you mean? She asked, her voice gentle. I've been so focused on building this empire, Michael began, the words flowing more freely than he expected. On being at the top, on making money, on being the best. But in all that, I've lost sight of what really matters. I've forgotten what it's like to connect with people on a real level. Emily stood there, listening intently, her expression never changing. Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. I've spent so many years thinking that power and money would bring me happiness, but I see now that I was wrong. It's the people, the connections, the moments that matter most. And you've shown me that. Emily's eyes softened as she heard him speak, and for the first time in a long time, Michael felt truly vulnerable. I've been chasing the wrong things, he said quietly, and I don't want to keep doing that. Emily was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on him. Finally, she spoke. It's not about abandoning your dreams or your work, Michael, she said softly. It's about balance. It's about understanding that there's more to life than just success. It's about finding meaning in what you do and who you do it with. Michael nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I want to learn how to do that, he said, his voice earnest. I want to learn from you. About living a life that's not just about what I can achieve, but about the people I can touch, the lives I can make better. Emily looked at him for a long moment, as though she was measuring the sincerity in his words. Finally, she gave him a small smile. It's not going to be easy, she said, but I think you're ready. Michael felt a surge of relief, a wave of hope washing over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path, even if he didn't have all the answers yet. "I'm ready to try," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Over the following weeks, Michael continued to meet with Emily, not just in the restaurant, but outside it as well. They would talk about everything: life, work, philosophy, and the things that truly mattered. With each conversation, Michael felt himself growing, changing in ways he hadn't expected. He began to realize that success wasn't about climbing higher, but about grounding himself in the things that truly made him feel alive. One evening, as they sat in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee and laughing together, Michael realized that he was no longer the same man who had walked into La Belle Époque months ago. He had changed. Emily had opened his eyes to a new world, one where success wasn't defined by money, but by the connections he made with others. And for the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he was finally living the life he had always wanted. As Michael continued to spend more time with Emily, he noticed the subtle shifts in his own perspective, the small but significant changes in his mindset that had been slowly taking root. They weren't always dramatic, but they were there, whispering to him at quiet moments, urging him to look deeper into the things he had once dismissed as unimportant. Emily's influence was undeniable. He had always been the type of person who measured success by his net worth, his companies, and his power. But with Emily, it was different. It wasn't about what he had accomplished or what he owned. It was about who he was, who he could be, and the impact he could make on the people around him. The more he learned from her, the more he realized that the wealth he had accumulated was a small part of the equation. He had always defined success by external factors, by things that others could see. But now, he understood that true success came from within. It came from the relationships he built, the way he treated people, and the legacy he left behind, not in the form of buildings or bank accounts, but in the lives he touched and the good he brought into the world. It wasn't easy for him to accept that. For years, he had been so focused on being at the top that he had neglected everything else. But with Emily's guidance, he began to question everything, and that made him uncomfortable. It made him realize just how far removed he had become from the person he used to be, the person who had once cared about something more than just financial success. Emily didn't push him. She never lectured him or told him what to do. Instead, she let him find his own way, offering support and advice when he asked for it, but never imposing her own views. She was patient with him, understanding that change wasn't something that could be forced. But even though it was hard for him, he was willing to try. He had come to admire her strength, her ability to stay grounded, to remain humble despite all the success she had seen and the challenges she had faced. She had found a way to balance the things that mattered most to her: her work, her relationships, her sense of purpose, and she did it without ever losing herself in the process. It was something Michael aspired to. One afternoon, after a particularly intense conversation about the future, Michael realized that he was ready to take the next step. He had come to a crossroads in his life, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt like he had a direction, a purpose. He had found clarity in Emily's words, in the way she saw the world, and he knew that it was time for him to stop just existing and start living in a way that truly mattered. That evening, as the sun set and the city came to life, Michael made a decision. He was going to take action. He was going to shift his focus, to pour his energy into the things that would have a lasting impact, not just on his companies, but on the people who depended on him, the people who needed him to be more than just a CEO. He wasn't sure exactly what that would look like yet, but he knew that it would require sacrifice. It would require him to step away from the world he had built and step into something new, something that was less about control and more about connection. He wanted to give back in a way that truly mattered, to make a difference in the lives of others, in a way that went beyond business and profit. And it wasn't just about money. He understood that now. It was about time, attention, and effort. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would last. He picked up his phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hello," she answered, her voice as calm as ever. "Hey, Emily," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of purpose. "I've been thinking a lot, and I want to do something. I want to make a difference, not just in my business, but in my life. And I need your help." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Emily spoke, her voice soft and thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I've always believed that we're capable of more than we think, especially when we step outside our comfort zones." "What are you thinking?" Michael took a deep breath. "I want to start giving back. I want to build something that has real value, not just financial value, but real, human value. I want to make a difference in people's lives." Emily's voice softened even more. "That's a beautiful idea, Michael, and I think you're ready to do it." He smiled at the sound of her voice. It wasn't just her support that mattered. It was the fact that she believed in him, in his ability to do something meaningful. He had never felt that before. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I'm not sure where to start, but I'm ready to figure it out." Emily gave a small laugh. "You'll figure it out. And when you do, you'll realize that it was all worth it." Michael stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the city. As he looked out, he saw the lights flickering on, the streets bustling with life. He felt a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. And that hope came not from his bank account, but from the realization that he was on the right path, one that would take him further than he had ever imagined, not just in business, but in life. Over the next few weeks, Michael's life slowly began to transform. He started to shift his priorities, focusing on the things that mattered the most, real connections with people, understanding his impact on the world, and learning how to lead with compassion instead of just control. He poured his efforts into creating initiatives that gave back to the community, helping people who were struggling, and using his resources to make a real difference. But despite the satisfaction he felt from these efforts, there was still something missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He spent more time with Emily, finding comfort in her grounded perspective on life. But even as he grew closer to her, there was an unspoken distance between them. He was still trying to navigate his feelings for her, unsure of whether she saw him as more than just the CEO of a big company. As the days went by, Michael found himself visiting the restaurant more often, even when he wasn't in need of a meal. He enjoyed the quiet moments with Emily, talking about everything from business to philosophy to personal growth. She was always patient with him, offering insights and perspectives that made him think in ways he had never considered before. It wasn't long before he realized that he was falling for her. The realization hit him one evening as they sat together in the small corner booth of the restaurant, sipping coffee and talking about their plans for the future. He had been so focused on building his empire, on achieving success, that he had overlooked the most important thing in life: love. As he looked across the table at Emily, he realized that he wanted to be with her, not because of her kindness or her intelligence, but because of who she was, someone who didn't seek to impress, someone who valued genuine connections over superficial accomplishments. He wanted to be a better man for her. The next day, Michael invited Emily to meet him at a local park. It was a quiet, peaceful place, far removed from the noise of the city. He knew this was the moment when he had to face the truth about how he felt. When Emily arrived, she smiled softly as she sat down next to him on the bench. The breeze was cool, the sky clear, and for once, the world seemed to stand still. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About everything. About what I've done, who I've become, and where I'm going. And I realized something." Emily turned to look at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What did you realize?" she asked. Michael took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak his truth. "I realized that I want to be with you," he said softly. "Not because of anything I can gain, but because of who you are. You've shown me what it means to truly live, and I don't want to lose that." There was a long pause as Emily absorbed his words. Her gaze softened, and she placed a hand gently on his. "Michael," she said quietly, "you've always been driven by success, by control. But you've changed. I can see that. You've started to listen, to understand, and that means something." Michael looked into her eyes, his heart pounding. "I'm not perfect. I still have a long way to go, but I want to learn. I want to learn how to be the kind of man who deserves you." Emily's lips curved into a gentle smile. "You already are that man, Michael." It was a simple statement, but it hit him harder than anything else. She believed in him, not because of his wealth or his accomplishments, but because of who he was becoming. He realized in that moment that it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about becoming the best version of himself, for her, for the world, and for himself. He took her hand in his and squeezed it gently, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't focused on what he could achieve. He was focused on what he could give, and that made all the difference. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings. Michael continued to build his initiatives, focusing on making a positive impact. But now, with Emily by his side, he found the motivation to push further. He knew that he was no longer doing it just for the recognition or the accolades. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. And as their relationship deepened, Michael knew that he had found something even more valuable than any business deal. He had found someone who saw him for who he truly was, someone who believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. They began to make plans together, dreaming of a future that was filled with purpose, love, and connection. It wasn't always easy, but they both knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything the world threw their way. And with that understanding, Michael knew that his journey had just begun. It wasn't about the empire anymore. It wasn't about the wealth. It was about love, about finding meaning in the simple moments, and about building something real, something that would last long after the buildings and bank accounts had faded away. And with Emily by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, Michael's life continued to evolve in ways he had never imagined. His work, once his sole focus, had begun to take on new meaning. With Emily by his side, he found himself thinking differently about the impact he could have on the world. Instead of measuring success by wealth or achievements, he started to define it by the relationships he built, the lives he touched, and the legacy he could create that went beyond boardrooms and business deals. But even as he grew more certain about his path, there were challenges ahead. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of his office, reviewing the latest community projects they had launched, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting it to be a routine business message. But when he saw the name on the screen, his heart sank. It was from his assistant, Emma. "Michael, we need to talk. There's something urgent." His mind raced. What could be so urgent? He excused himself from the conversation with Emily and stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Michael, I'm afraid there's been a situation. One of our major investors is threatening to pull out of the deal. It's causing a ripple effect, and if we don't act fast, it could affect everything we've worked for." Michael felt the familiar rush of tension flood his body. His first instinct was to dive into problem-solving mode, to fix it, to do what he had always done, take control. But something was different now. He paused, taking a deep breath before responding. "How much time do we have?" "A week at most. We need a solution, and fast." The conversation ended, and Michael returned to his office, where Emily was waiting. He could see the concern on her face, but he didn't immediately say anything. Instead, he sat down, his mind running through the possibilities. Emily watched him carefully, sensing that something had changed. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with concern. Michael ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation pressing on him. "We've hit a roadblock with one of our investors," he said, his voice tight. "If we can't find a way to resolve it, it could put everything we've built at risk." Emily didn't speak right away. She simply sat there, looking at him, her eyes thoughtful. After a moment, she spoke softly. "You've been so focused on building this empire. But sometimes, things are beyond our control. Maybe it's time to rethink how you're approaching all of this." Michael felt a flicker of frustration rise in him. "I don't have the luxury of rethinking anything, Emily. We have a deadline, and I need to fix this." Emily shook her head gently. "I understand that, but what if this is a sign? What if the universe is telling you that maybe you've outgrown this version of yourself? Maybe it's time to let go of the old way of doing things." Michael stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. He had spent so much of his life striving to control every outcome, to stay on top, and now she was suggesting that he might need to let go of all that? It felt like everything he had built was crumbling. But Emily wasn't done. "You can't keep running on empty, Michael. You've been pouring all your energy into your work. But what about the people who matter most? What about you? Are you going to keep sacrificing yourself for something that might not even make you happy in the end?" Her words cut through him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen. She wasn't just asking him to make a decision about business. She was asking him to make a decision about his life. "I don't know what to do," Michael admitted, his voice low. Emily smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go of the fear of losing control. Let things unfold as they may. Michael sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right, in a way. He had spent so much of his life fighting for control that he had never considered what it would feel like to let go. What if there was more to life than the constant pursuit of success? What if happiness wasn't something that could be bought, but something that had to be nurtured? The following days were a whirlwind of emotions as Michael wrestled with these questions. He attended meetings, dealt with the investor crisis, and tried to keep everything together. But each time he found himself back in the office, staring at the cold numbers and figures, something didn't feel right. It felt like he was going through the motions, but not truly living. Emily's words stayed with him, and he knew that, for the first time in his life, he was facing a crossroads. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of his past decisions. He needed to make a change, not just for the company, but for himself. A week later, Michael called a meeting with his leadership team. He had decided to take a step back from his day-to-day involvement in the company, to delegate more responsibilities and focus on the bigger picture. It was a difficult decision, but one that felt right. As he sat there, explaining his new direction, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was no longer consumed by the need to control every aspect of his business. And when the meeting was over, Emily was waiting for him, her smile warm and reassuring. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Michael smiled back, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you." Emily's eyes sparkled. "You've always had it in you, Michael. You just needed to see it." As they stood there, side by side, Michael realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that wasn't defined by his wealth or achievements, but by the connections he made, the lives he touched, and the person he was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace the future with open arms. Michael's transformation had been gradual, but unmistakable. The more time he spent away from the grind of business and with Emily, the more he realized how much he had been missing in his life. For the first time, he wasn't just chasing the next deal or the next achievement. He was looking at the world differently, seeing people, not as assets or obstacles, but as individuals with their own dreams, struggles, and stories. It was a perspective he had never allowed himself to embrace, but now it felt like the key to everything. As Michael stepped away from his daily responsibilities at the company, he found himself reflecting on his past decisions and what he wanted for the future. He had been a leader, a CEO, a man of power and control, but now he understood that true leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about compassion, understanding, and giving back. But despite his newfound clarity, there were still moments of doubt. His decision to step back from the company had been a hard one. He had spent years building it, and letting go, even partially, was like surrendering a piece of himself. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having the answers. But now, he realized that the answers weren't always clear-cut. Sometimes, letting go was the only way forward. One afternoon, after a long day of planning new initiatives with Emily, Michael stood at the window of his office, looking out over the city. The skyline was a familiar sight, but tonight, it felt different. It felt more distant. He had spent so many years striving to conquer this city, to leave his mark. But now, as he looked at it, he wondered if he had been so focused on winning that he had missed out on living. Emily had helped him see that the world didn't revolve around success in the traditional sense. It was about human connection, about finding purpose in the everyday. And, above all, it was about understanding that he could still make an impact without being driven solely by ambition. As Michael looked out over the city, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his assistant, Emma. "We've got a problem with one of the new projects. The budget is being questioned, and the board wants to meet." Michael sighed. It was always something. It seemed like there was never a moment of peace, never a time when something didn't need fixing. But instead of the usual rush to solve the problem, Michael felt something different. A calmness, a confidence that, no matter the outcome, he didn't have to shoulder the weight of it alone. He had Emily. He had his team. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to control everything. He could delegate. He could trust. And that made all the difference. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he typed back. But as he put the phone down, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline, the anxiety of another crisis to solve, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. He had spent so many years thinking that success meant handling everything himself, being the one to fix it all. But now, he understood that leadership wasn't about doing it all. It was about knowing when to step back, when to trust others, and when to let things unfold. The meeting with the board went better than he expected. The project's budget was restructured, but they came to an agreement. Michael didn't have to fight for every inch, didn't have to prove his worth with every word. He simply listened, made suggestions, and watched as his team worked together to find solutions. It was a new experience for him, and it felt liberating. After the meeting, Michael made his way back to his apartment, where Emily was waiting. They had planned a quiet evening together, just the two of them. When he walked in, she greeted him with a smile, and he felt his stress from the day melt away. "How did it go?" she asked, her tone light and easy. "Better than I expected," Michael replied, sitting down next to her. He could see the genuine curiosity in her eyes, the same curiosity that had drawn him to her from the start. And for the first time, he felt like he could be completely open with her. "I've been thinking about everything you've said, about what it means to lead, to be successful." Emily raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. "I think I've been going about it all wrong. I spent so much time trying to prove myself, trying to control everything. But now, I see that true leadership isn't about power. It's about collaboration, about understanding, about trust." Emily smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I'm glad you're starting to see that," she said softly. Michael looked at her, his heart full. She had always seen things clearly, and now, thanks to her, he was beginning to as well. "I don't have it all figured out," he said honestly, "but I'm learning, and I think that's what really matters." Emily nodded, leaning into him. "It's all part of the journey, Michael, and you're on the right path." As they sat there together, the weight of his past ambitions seemed to lift. He had worked so hard to get to the top, but now he realized that the journey itself, filled with the people you care about and the difference you make along the way, was what truly mattered. And for the first time in his life, Michael felt at peace with that. The weeks that followed were transformative for Michael. He had let go of the need to control everything and had found a new rhythm in his life. He began to prioritize the people around him, his team, his friends, and most of all, Emily. Their connection deepened as they spent more time together, talking not just about their dreams, but about their fears, their pasts, and what they hoped for in the future. Michael no longer saw success as a solitary pursuit. He realized it was about the people you touched along the way. His company was thriving, but he knew now that it wasn't just about profits or milestones. It was about the impact he had on the lives of those he worked with. As time went on, Michael and Emily grew closer. They took trips together, explored new places, and shared moments that were both simple and profound. It was during one of these trips that Michael realized something that had been simmering inside him for a while. It wasn't just Emily's strength or her intelligence that had drawn him to her. It was her ability to see him for who he truly was, to understand him in ways no one else had. She didn't see him as just a CEO or a businessman. She saw him as Michael, a man who had been lost in the pursuit of something that didn't truly fulfill him. And she had shown him a way out of that. One evening, as they sat together by the ocean, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael turned to her, his heart full. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice quiet. Emily smiled softly, sensing that something important was coming. "About everything, really. About how far I've come, and how much I've changed. And I realized something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You've helped me find the person I was always meant to be. You've shown me that life is more than just achieving things, that it's about the journey, the people, and the connections we make." Emily reached over, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was warm and reassuring. "I'm glad to hear that, Michael," she said gently. "But you've always had it in you. You just needed to see it." Michael looked at her, his gaze full of gratitude. "I never would have realized it without you," he admitted. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "I think you would have found your way eventually. You just needed the right perspective." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He had spent so many years chasing something that he thought would bring him happiness, but now he understood that true fulfillment came from within. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about the person you became along the way, the connections you made, and the lives you touched. As the days turned into weeks, Michael continued to grow in ways he hadn't expected. He had found a new balance in his life, one that allowed him to focus on what truly mattered. He spent more time with Emily, not just as her partner, but as someone who wanted to be the best version of himself. And she, in turn, continued to support him, offering guidance and encouragement when he needed it most. But despite the changes in his life, one thing remained constant: his desire to make a difference. He knew that his work was far from over, but now, he was approaching it with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just building an empire for the sake of wealth or success. He was building something that would leave a lasting impact, something that would benefit others long after he was gone. Emily had shown him that success wasn't about what you had, it was about what you gave. And that realization changed everything. One afternoon, as they sat in his office, Michael received a call from his assistant, Emma. The news was unexpected. "Michael, we've just received an offer from a major competitor. They want to buy us out, and they're offering a significant amount of money." Michael listened carefully, his mind already starting to process the offer. But instead of feeling the familiar rush of excitement, he felt something else, something deeper. He thought about the offer for a moment, then turned to Emily. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice steady but uncertain. Emily smiled, her eyes meeting his. "It's your decision, Michael. But remember, it's not just about the money. It's about what you want to create, what you want to leave behind." Michael nodded slowly, taking in her words. He had spent so long focusing on external success that he had forgotten to listen to his own heart. And now, he realized that the offer, while tempting, wasn't the answer. He had found something far more valuable than money. He had found a sense of purpose. "I think we're going to turn it down," he said, a sense of clarity settling over him. "We're going to build something better, something that really matters." Emily's smile widened, her eyes shining with pride. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Michael squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing something outside of himself. He was building a life that was truly his own, with Emily by his side. And that, he realized, was the greatest success of all. As the months went by, Michael found himself fully embracing the changes he had set into motion. His life had taken a different direction, and he was beginning to see the results of his decision to focus on what truly mattered. He was no longer consumed by the need to prove himself or by the drive for more money, power, or success. Now, he was creating something that would have a lasting impact, a legacy of genuine connections and meaningful work. Emily had become not only his partner, but his anchor in this new chapter. She had shown him the path to balance, to understanding that there was more to life than the endless pursuit of external validation. Together, they had begun working on several community initiatives aimed at helping those in need, providing opportunities for young people to learn and grow, and making the world a better place in small, but significant ways. The more they worked together, the more Michael realized that the impact he wanted to make wasn't about building more skyscrapers or expanding his business empire. It was about investing in people, fostering relationships, and creating opportunities for others to succeed. This new perspective brought a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He felt connected to the world in a way that he hadn't in years, and it was all thanks to Emily's influence. But as his sense of purpose deepened, a new challenge presented itself. One evening, as Michael and Emily sat together in his office reviewing their latest project, Michael received an unexpected call. His phone lit up with a name he hadn't seen in a while: Marcus Blackwood. The last time they had spoken was over a year ago, when Marcus had questioned Michael's ability to adapt to a changing world. Michael had spent years proving Marcus wrong, but now, as he stared at the screen, he realized how little he cared about that approval. With a deep breath, he answered the call. "Michael," Marcus's voice came through the phone, smooth as ever. "I need to talk to you about something important." Michael's heart sank, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "What's going on, Marcus?" "It's about your company," Marcus continued, without wasting any time. "I've been following your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. But there's something you're missing." Michael felt the familiar rush of irritation, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What do you mean?" "You've been focusing on all the wrong things," Marcus said, his tone almost smug. "I've made you an offer. It's a deal that will make you more money than you've ever seen." Michael hesitated. His first instinct was to dismiss Marcus outright, but something in the way he spoke made him pause. "Go on." he said, trying to maintain a neutral tone. I want to buy you out, Marcus said bluntly. You've been running your company in a way that's inefficient. You're not thinking big enough. I can help you make it more profitable, more scalable. This offer will set you up for life, Michael. There was a long silence as Michael absorbed the offer. His first reaction was to feel a sense of pride that he had built something worth buying. But it was quickly replaced by a feeling of unease. He thought about all the work he had done to create a company with real purpose, to connect with people in a meaningful way. Marcus's offer didn't feel like a step forward. It felt like a return to the old ways: money, power, control. Michael took a deep breath and looked over at Emily, who had been watching him quietly from across the room. Her eyes were steady, understanding what he was thinking before he even said a word. What do you think? Michael asked, his voice soft. Emily stood up and walked over to him, her presence a grounding force. She placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring smile. This isn't about money anymore, Michael, she said quietly. You've already made your mark. Now it's about something bigger than just business. It's about creating something that matters. Michael nodded slowly, his thoughts aligning with Emily's words. He had come so far, but he knew now that the most important thing wasn't a financial deal. It was the difference he was making in people's lives. I think I've already made my decision, Michael said, looking back at the phone. Tell Marcus I'm not interested. He hung up the phone without waiting for Marcus's response. The decision was made. He wasn't going to let the temptation of more money and power derail the purpose he had found. He looked at Emily, his heart full. Thank you, he said softly, for helping me see what truly matters. Emily smiled, her eyes warm. You've always known what matters, Michael. You just had to find the courage to live it. As they stood there, side by side, Michael realized that he had finally found the balance he had been searching for. He had learned that success wasn't about what he could accumulate. It was about what he could give back. It wasn't about climbing to the top. It was about lifting others up with him. And in that moment, with Emily by his side, Michael knew that the journey ahead would be one of purpose, connection, and a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever imagined. Months passed, and Michael's life continued to evolve in ways he hadn't expected. The shift from ambition-driven success to purpose-driven fulfillment had not been easy, but it had been more rewarding than anything he had ever experienced. Emily had become more than just his partner. She had become the mirror he never knew he needed. She reflected not just the person he was, but the person he could be. And together, they created something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Michael's company, while still thriving, had become a force for good in the community. They launched several initiatives that focused on education, helping underprivileged youth gain access to resources and opportunities they would have otherwise never had. It wasn't just charity, it was about giving people the tools to empower themselves. Emily's influence was felt not just in his work, but in his everyday. She showed him how to listen, how to understand the people around him, how to lead with empathy, and how to value the journey rather than just the destination. And in return, Michael shared with her the world of business, teaching her the ins and outs of making an impact on a larger scale, ensuring that their efforts would continue to grow and thrive. There were challenges, of course. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were setbacks, financial struggles, and moments of doubt. But they faced everything together, hand in hand. Michael no longer saw himself as a lone wolf, driven by ego and fear. He saw himself as part of something bigger, something that mattered. As they stood together on a crisp fall evening at the opening of their new community center, Michael couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The center was a tangible representation of everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, and everything they had built together. It was more than just a building. It was a symbol of hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small, but meaningful. There were no flashy speeches or extravagant displays. Just a simple moment where Michael and Emily, standing side by side, cut the ribbon to open the doors to a new future. The crowd applauded, and as the cheers echoed around them, Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was his real legacy. Not the empire he had once thought he wanted to build, but the impact he was making in people's lives. As the crowd dispersed and the event came to an end, Emily looked at Michael with a quiet smile. "We did it," she said softly. Michael looked at her, his heart full. "No, we didn't," he replied with a grin. "We're just getting started." And in that moment, he knew she was right. This was just the beginning. They had built something incredible, but there was so much more to do. There were more lives to touch, more people to help, more changes to make. And as long as they were together, Michael knew they could accomplish anything. As they walked away from the event, side by side, Michael realized that his greatest success wasn't the money, the power, or the accolades. It was the person he had become, the person he was with Emily. And that was worth more than anything else in the world. He had found true fulfillment, not in climbing to the top, but in lifting others up with him. And with Emily by his side, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, ready to create a better world, one step at a time.